as I was going through different videos on YouTube, I eventually went over and watched Alex and Rhett talk about how we need to save Christianity from Christians. And I actually really enjoyed the video overall, and I just have a couple of thoughts that I'll share with you for whatever it's worth. I mean, you're watching my YouTube channel, so cool. I appreciate that. But the video of them talking is in the description, and you should totally watch that first. It's very interesting. And then if you care what I have to say, then you can come back, I guess. So watch their video, link in the description, and then you can come back here if you're so interested. Okay, so the first thing that I'm thinking about with this is the question of what about Christianity needs rethinking? And yeah, like the idea that we need to save it from Christians is kind of funny, right? It's ironic, and I think there's something true about it, right? Because if we make Christianity about us or anything about what we're doing, then we're kind of missing the point of what Jesus is doing, right? Because it's what Jesus is doing in and through us that we need to tell other people about. And so, in that sense, it's really important what they're saying. And I think that it's really good to talk about look, let's bring this back to Jesus. Let's get out of some of our more cultural dogmas, the things that we have brought to the Bible, especially because of where we are as a culture. And I think that that is important. And they're tapping into things that we as Christians, especially Western American Christians, just are totally blind to. And one of the things that I really like in my recent studies over the past several years is just discovering how Jewish everything is, which is like so obvious, right? Because this is a Jewish text from a Jewish rabbi and followers of this Jewish rabbi who believed that he was the Messiah and that he completely transformed their entire schema of understanding what they were hoping for, and that in bringing the kingdom of God in the new way that they had not expected, it changes everything. And then they're looking for, how does this apply and what do we do? And they go and they mine the Old Testament again. And they say, this is incredible, right? And all of that apparently was lost for a long time because the Christians and the Jews kind of split ways, and the Christians were like, we don't care about that Jewish thing. Like, yeah, what about those guys? And so there actually was like this massive loss to the Christian world because we didn't understand where we were coming from. And only recently, in the last 50 years or something like that, apparently, have scholars actually started to get back into this of like, wait a second, Jesus was a Jew, right? Like obviously, right? And so there's so much that ties back into it, and the New Testament using the Old Testament and all of that stuff, very exciting, very cool. But yes, when you take modern Western American views and you're like, these are our values, and therefore this has to line up with Christianity, like, yeah, clearly we're doing things wrong, right? And so I think that there is something to be said for Christians, Western American Christians, and probably anywhere else in the world too, can get hung up on their own stuff instead of just going with what the Bible has. So let's talk about some of these things, right? So if they're talking about we need to embrace faith over reason, right? That was one of the big things that went into this. Um, there might be some truth to this. I think it's a little bit weak sauce, in my opinion, because there should be reasons for why we believe. There actually is evidence and there actually is philosophy. Now, at the same time, yes, it is true what they're talking about, that the Bible does have these, statements of like, hey, stop relying on all this stuff from man. And it's really about the power of God. And there's truth to that, right? And coming from a more charismatic stream of Christianity, yeah, it should have power. Like there should be reality behind all of this. But that reality is actually real. It's not just faith, right? It's not just this. And when they say faith, I think that they mean like, oh, just this belief that you hold, right? It's just this thought that you have that you think is nice and that is helpful or something and directs you in a certain way or something, right? Like there actually is reality behind all of this, right? Which is where the power comes from, right? Like it has to be real. It can't just be, well, I have this mental assent. And this is something that I've seen in people like Jordan Peterson or whatever, where it's like, well, yeah, like I believe it in the sense that it's important for people to believe it. Okay, but if it's not true, if it's not real, then like, what are you doing, man? Right? So like, I think that there is something to the reality of it that is important for us Christians to continue to hold on to. But yeah, if the arguments are bad, if the things we're clinging to are false, then we gotta learn more, we gotta grow more, and we gotta move forward, right? So the attacks on apologists, I don't know. I don't know how to parse all of that. I just have not spent a lot of time in the apologist circles like high school was the last time that I even like dipped my toe in that. And it hasn't been like something I'm particularly fascinated by. I'm much more interested in like what's the Bible all about and what does it talk about and all that. Like I'm far more interested in the text itself. So the logic and the syllogisms or whatever, like I don't know, that just hasn't been my thing. But I know really smart people who are into that, and so I don't know. I'm not saying well that's bad, but at the same time, if it is true that we are doing a bad job with our apologetics by saying things that are untrue and easily debunked and all that, well then we should be doing better. Like we should absolutely be doing better with that. But at the same time, it's hard for me to like take this critique. Again, not being in this, like this is not my thing, but like taking this critique from Alex, um, when I watched his video with William Lane Craig, and he starts out being like, "Well, I don't think that this argument that you've been pushing is very good," and by the end is like, "Well, I'm gonna have to think about this a lot more. That's good." Like maybe the arguments are actually better than people are saying that they are. But I don't know, right? Because I do watch a lot of atheist YouTube and people do point out a lot of things. So I don't know. Okay. But so yeah, so we should be doing that. We should be doing better. We should be relying on truth because it actually is based in reality. Okay. So then Christians should embrace truth, right? This is his second point. And yeah, like if we're spreading lies, like when we discover that we're spreading a lie or that that's not true, right? Like we need to turn around, right? And so he pushes really hard on the evolution thing because that is something that really has led to a lot of people deconstructing their faith because they grew up being told that young earth creationism is the only appropriate way to understand the Bible. And so therefore, if this is wrong, then you need to throw out everything including Jesus. And that's just so wrong. Like that entire mindset is completely incorrect. Okay? So like but I'm you're here to hear what I have to say. All right? You're here to hear me. Okay? So when I was in high school, I was still very staunchly young earth creationist. Not because I was like this is, it has to be this way, but because I hadn't encountered anything where I was like I should consider something different, right? I just hadn't considered anything different. And I went to a public high school where I took honors biology and I took chemistry and I passed these classes with flying colors. Okay? I did well in these classes. I even wrote a paper on chirality, okay, in my class. And my teacher was like, I had to go look this up in the school library from like the big dictionary. Like, okay, so like I was interested in evolution at the time. Because at the time I was still in the young earth creationist, the Yek world, and I was like, what do you guys have for me? What else is out there? And in my experience going to the public high school that I went to, taking the honors biology classes that I took, and the other things that were in there was nothing that was even close to suggesting that evolution had anything to offer. Okay. So again, if we're talking about listening to people's stories, and it's important to understand the pain points or the things that people went through or whatever, the reality is that as someone who grew up understanding the arguments for young earth creationism, going to a public high school, taking honors level classes, there was nothing that challenged my views at all in any of those classes, other than people just telling me that dogmatically this is how things are. It wasn't until years later when I started poking into things where I was like, oh no, that's it. No, that makes a lot of sense. But I believe it was King Critical. He had a video where he just kind of offhandedly pointed out, like, if what you're giving people is moths changing color as your evidence for evolution, then like no wonder nobody's going to go along with you. Okay? Because that's not even close to what the young earth creationists take beef with, right? Like again, the first video that I made on this channel was about defining evolution, right? Are we talking about descent with modification? Because nobody disagrees with that. Are we talking about common descent? There's a lot of disagreement about that, and moths do not tap that at all, okay? And then we have abiogenesis. How did life come from non-life? Okay, and if we go back to the Miller-Urey experiment, okay, which was in my textbook as a high schooler, I was like, well, chirality, so like whatever, okay? So like I was able to completely ignore all of the evidence that was presented for evolution because the evidence was terrible. It was really shoddy and pathetic. So again, just like talking about, the embracing the faith thing before and like coming up with good truth arguments. We need to have better for that if you want people from the young earth camp to come over and say, okay, no, there's actually something to this evolutionary thing. Okay. Now, since high school, I have learned a lot. And I have dug into things way beyond even what like Eugenie Scott in her, evolution versus creationism book, which somebody recommended to me, like that didn't even touch it. Like nothing was touching the issues that I was like, I don't understand what the problem is. Since learning about like, hey, look, the 23 chromosomes and like, how cool is that? And that's looks like a fusing thing. And hey, look, we've got these strata, and you have stuff that just doesn't cross into other strata. And then you're like, okay, but what about these trees? And then it's like, okay, so we got to talk about this, right? You need to calmly and carefully and well talk through the various pieces of evidence that convinced you. And those are the videos that I watched. I was like, now that is good. I like that. That's helpful. Thank you. Helping unpack all of this. And then with that, then what has to happen as a Christian, if you are walking away from young earth creationism, is you go, okay, what did I not understand about the Bible? Well, okay, what you probably didn't understand was that it's not written as a modern scientific textbook for Western Americans. It was actually written for Jewish people, okay, like thousands and thousands of years ago. Like this is a different kind of text, and it's literally literature. Made a video on that recently as well. So like the critique of, wow, you got to embrace the truth of evolution. Then there's a lot of work to be done to teach that to people, to actually teach them what evolution is, and then also be very honest about what we don't have from that. Okay. It is a really nice theory that has really good explanatory power for things. And that's why people say this is the most important theory out there for explaining where we are and what we observe. Okay, cool. But you need to walk people through that patiently, because they've just been getting, these little sound bites, and then they hear about moths again. And what are you talking about? Okay, sorry. That was me talking for a long time on that topic. I think because what they were complaining about in the video was exactly what I experienced on the other side. Does that make sense? I hope so. If not, comment. There's more to talk about on this one. There's more to talk about all of this. But these are just my initial thoughts. And that's why this is rambly and not like a good script or anything. So I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Okay. So then the last one was Christians should embrace Jesus. And yes, duh, right? The question is, what does embracing Jesus mean, right? These are the questions. And as Western American Christians who are in a nation that allows us to have the opportunity to vote, what should we be voting for and how should we be voting? Now, I completely agree with Rhett that if your hope is in the political structures of the United States of America and your role in that, you're not a good Christian, because your hope is not in Christ. And our hope absolutely needs to be in Christ. But again, I found it ironic that Rhett's big beef was with the fear that right-wing American Christians have. I'm like, dude, have you been watching the political world? Like the left, it's like crazy fearful. Like it's chaos over there. Like, and if you haven't seen that, if you don't know about that, then there's a great supercut of like the last DNC convention or whatever some years ago, where like they just talked about a particular Republican candidate, and that's all they talked about. They didn't talk about anything else, right? So fear is real on all sides. And Rhett is right that we as Christians should be rising well above that. And we should not be operating out of fear. We should instead be trusting Jesus and following his leading as we go through things. So all of this coming around to, I watch this, I'm like, you know what? They're pointing to things that are good. They're pointing to things that are problems that Christians do often fall into, these traps, these things that people just get hung up on. And the reality then is that we as Christians need to learn more. Cool, right? But then we also need to like recognize that we don't know everything and there's more to learn. And I think that it's important to have grace for people who aren't yet there. wherever there is, right? Whether that's on the political spectrum, or their understanding of evolution, or what they believe from the apologists that they've heard, right? The trusted people that they've heard, like how trustworthy are they, or like how well are their arguments actually stacked up against other things. But another problem that often happens is we end up talking past one another instead of to or with one another, and so the arguments start getting fragmented, and the points that are actually good don't get addressed and say, yeah, that's a good point. But then also, okay, yeah, but also like recognize that this is a good point, right? And so I guess part of why I'm making this video is because I want to demonstrate that here. They made some good points, and I agree with them on some points. And then they also made points that I found funny because it's the other end, the mirror of what I experienced as a person growing up and going through all of this. Um, yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say, but that's my initial like response thing. What are your thoughts on this? And is there anything you want me to talk about more, or you're like, well, tell me more about that? I'd be very curious if there's anything that you're curious about, because then I'd love to talk about more or whatever. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful in something. But yeah, this is the Blogogy. Let's learn more together.